Well, the UN has been spearheading a large humanitarian operation in the 2 months since the Taliban took over Afghanistan. 3.8 million people have received food supplies in that period, but aid alone will not help as the country's entire economy is at risk of collapse. The UN chief said Afghanistan faces a make or break moment.
Already before the Taliban takeover in August, Afghanistan's fragile economy, which has been kept afloat by foreign aid over the past 20 years, suffered from the impact of drought and COVID. Right now, with assets frozen and development aid paused, the economy is breaking down. Banks are closing and essential services, such as healthcare, have been suspended in many places. We need to find ways to make the economy breathe again. And this can be done without violating international laws or compromising principles. We must seek ways to create the conditions that would allow Afghan professionals and civil servants to continue working to serve the Afghan population. I urge the world to take action and inject liquidity into the Afghan economy to avoid collapse. This is a make or break moment. If we do not act and help Afghans weather this storm and do it soon, not only they, but all the world will pay a heavy price. Without food, without jobs, without their rights protected, we will see more and more Afghans fleeing their homes in search of a better life. The flow of illicit drugs, criminal and terrorist networks will also likely increase. This will not only badly affect Afghanistan itself, but also the region and the rest of the world.
The UN Secretary General there, Antonio Guterres. Well, US President Joe Biden is taking part in that virtual G20 emergency summit on Afghanistan. Let's cross live now to Washington, where Arise US Correspondent Eric Ham is waiting to speak to us. Good to see you, Eric. How evident is it to people in Washington, where you are, that the Afghan economy is collapsing? How concerned are they?
Yeah, Charles, this is an issue for lawmakers here in Washington. We know that President Biden is already meeting with G20 leaders, and they're in this special summit on Afghanistan. We also know that the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is in town as well, hosting a number of G20 leaders as well. And this is becoming a primary issue, but also, Charles, one issue that is occurring outside of the spotlight of this larger meeting is some tensions that are also at play. We do know that China's Xi Jinping has not called into the virtual summit for this special summit on Afghanistan. In addition, we know that Russia's Vladimir Putin also is not on the call as well. And there are concerns that they believe that Western nations, and from what our sources are telling us, Western nations are actually putting their finger on the pulse as to what happens directly in Afghanistan, and that has led to some tensions, which is why those two leaders are not on the call. In addition, we do know that China and Russia have been advocating for the release of the more than $10 billion in assets that are frozen largely in Western banks. And so they want to see those resources freed up to be allowed for Afghanistan to be able to have greater control of their destiny. But right now, the United States and other Western nations aren't ready to pull the trigger.
So basically, Eric, the big problem is that the Taliban is not a government that the US and other Western countries recognizes. And until that happens, a lot of the funds cannot be unfrozen. And without that, they can't keep the Afghan economy running. As the UN Secretary General said, this is a make or break moment.
It is. It's a make or break moment, but Charles, it's actually going to come at the hands of these G20 leaders to be able to step in and decide whether or not this country will survive or fail. because much of the money is actually held in both the UK and United States banks. And right now, those leaders are not prepared to release those resources. And also what we're seeing is there's greater advocacy, particularly from China and from Russia, that that the United States should not be holding these types of conditions on Afghanistan, human rights issues, or how they treat women. They believe that aid should flow to Afghanistan irrespective of those issues, because that is how they believe aid should actually be handled. And we do know that this is one of the reasons why a number of other nations have leaned heavily on China, because China does provide aid without these types of preconditions. And so this is, of course, leading to greater issues and greater tensions. And already we know that China and the United States are locked into a very tense battle right now over major economic reforms and the trade battle between the two countries. And so clearly right now, Afghanistan is becoming a political football between the West and the East.
Well, I mean, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is talking about injecting money into the Afghan economy and bypassing the Taliban. But if the idea is to prop up the Afghan economy and the suggestion is to inject cash in and bypass the Taliban, I mean, if you prop up the economy, aren't you also propping up the Taliban?
Yeah, it seems very difficult as to how you can do one without the other, because we are talking about a government that is going to need resources, that is going to need to be able to pay people from the various agencies. And it's typically in government where much of this is going to happen. So how they try to create a stable society without a stable government seems to be anathema to what they're in fact trying to do at this time. You don't see other countries that are stable with stable economies but not stable governments. And so again, this is a very tight needle that many Western nations are trying to thread right now. In fact, we saw this with the end of those talks just recently between the United States and the Taliban, where the United States was trying to continue to open the line of discussion, but at the same time didn't want to be seen as providing a level of imprimatur or credibility to the government.
But of course, beyond the politics, Eric, this is life-saving support that the UN is talking about. There are people who need that aid just to survive as the country heads into the winter months. So what the world needs to figure out is a mechanism where you continue to help people on the ground, but you also continue to hold the Taliban to account. And we've got about 30 seconds.
That's absolutely right. What we're seeing here is the West, led by the United Nations and the United States, that is trying to push the Taliban to be more open, to be more inclusive, and they're using a carrot and stick approach. The question is, will it work?
And that's a very good note on which to end. It's a hanging question, isn't it? Eric, thank you very much indeed. Eric Ham, our US correspondent, talking to me there from Washington and giving us his analysis of the latest on Afghanistan.